The heart of 16th century France, a story unfolded that would echo through the annals of history. The tale of a young girl, Isabelle de Valois, whose life was cruelly altered by the whims of power, politics, and an ancient institution. She was born into one of Europe's most prestigious families, the Spanish Habsburgs, in 1546, a time when dynastic marriages were more than mere unions. They were power plays on the world stage. Yet, for all her regal birthright, Isabel's life was destined to be filled with tragedy. As a child of just 14 years, she found herself in the unthinkable situation of being forced into marriage with a king far older than her and gravely ill, an experience that no girl of her age should have ever faced. Her marriage to King Philip II of Spain, a man nearly twice her age, was not one born of love, but of political necessity. Philip, the King of Spain, was a monarch of immense power, but his personal life was far from idyllic. His previous wife, Queen Mary I of England, had died, leaving him without an heir. As a ruler who saw his royal bloodline as the ultimate security for his kingdom, Philip's need for a new wife was critical. But Isabel, young and naive, had no choice in the matter. Her father, King Henry II of France, saw an opportunity to secure an alliance with Spain and forced his daughter into this union. The arrangement, as cynical as it was, highlighted the political machinery that operated behind the scenes of royal courts, where love, affection, and the rights of women were disregarded in favor of power. The decision to marry Isabel was not just about political alliances, it was also about securing Spain's future. Yet, little did Isabel know that her marriage to King Philip would not be the promise of a future that many young girls dream of. Instead, it would be the beginning of a grim chapter in her life, one where youth and beauty would not shield her from the harsh realities of life at the Spanish court. She had no say in her destiny, no voice in the decisions that would define her fate. This is the tragic tale of how one young girl was thrust into a life of royal obligation, where she was not seen as a person, but a pawn in a game of power. Isabel, with her delicate beauty and unblemished innocence, was sent to Spain in 1559, with her fate already sealed. At just 14, she became the second wife of Philip II, a king whose health was rapidly declining. He was not the young, vibrant ruler one might have expected. Rather, he was a man in the final stages of a long illness, suffering from gout and other ailments that left him in constant pain. Philip's physical state mirrored his emotional isolation. He was a king who had suffered great personal losses, the death of his first wife and the death of his beloved son, Don Carlos, weighing heavily on his heart. His relationship with Isabel, however, was marked by an overwhelming sense of duty rather than any affection. The court that Isabel entered was cold, lifeless, and disinterested in her needs or desires. Her youth was overshadowed by the age and fragility of her husband, whose health seemed to worsen by the day. The wedding night, often viewed as the beginning of a union in the eyes of many, was for Isabel a stark contrast to the dreams she had once had of love and happiness. Her role as queen was not about companionship or partnership, but about producing an heir. And with Philip II's frail health, this became all the more urgent. Yet, Isabel's innocence made her an unwilling participant in the grand game of political survival. Isabel's story, though rooted in royal bloodlines and the politics of European power, also represents the tragedy of many young women in history who are used as bargaining chips, their desires and futures written off for the sake of maintaining political stability. Isabel's tragic marriage to Philip II was not the love story of two people destined to be together, but a bleak reminder of the role that women played in the politics of their time, where their voices were stifled by the weight of duty and the expectations of their families and kingdoms. As Isabel's life unfolded, the tragedy of her marriage was compounded by the sorrow of watching her husband's deteriorating health. Philip II, though a powerful king, was far from the ideal husband or partner. His constant physical suffering isolated him further, and he was not a man capable of offering the affection or care that a young wife like Isabel needed. Instead, she found herself alone, locked in a cold, emotionless marriage that left little room for the joy or companionship one might expect from such an important union. The days dragged on for Isabel, and with each passing day, the reality of her marriage grew more oppressive. She was trapped in a gilded cage, her beauty and youth fading as she watched her husband wither away before her eyes. Isabel had been thrust into a position of power and influence, yet she was helpless in the face of her own suffering. Her marriage, meant to strengthen the bonds between two powerful kingdoms, had instead become a symbol of her own pain, and as the months turned into years, her once bright future seemed to grow ever dimmer. Isabel's life, marked by the cruel weight of duty, continued its downward spiral, consumed by the struggles of her marriage and the oppressive political climate she found herself in. As the years passed, the relentless pressures of her position as queen only grew heavier, and the court became a place of constant tension. While Philip II was steadily becoming more consumed by his physical ailments and personal griefs, Isabel was left to navigate a royal life that was constantly defined by the harshness of a marriage that was void of tenderness, love, or even friendship. In the midst of this emotional desert, Isabel's primary concern became producing an heir, a duty she felt keenly as the only viable way to justify her existence within the Spanish monarchy. The failure to produce a male heir was seen as a profound embarrassment, not just to Philip, but to the entire Habsburg dynasty. However, even as Isabel endured the weight of this responsibility, there were no moments of joy to balance out her misery. As the Spanish court, steeped in the intense and often oppressive Catholic orthodoxy of the time, focused on ritualistic ceremonies and public appearances, Isabel's private reality couldn't have been more different. She was constantly surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and family members who had their own agendas, and the isolation she experienced only served to deepen her suffering. Philip, a man who had once been driven by the zeal of ruling one of the most powerful empires in the world, was now retreating further into his own world of illness and despair. His inability to offer Isabel any sort of emotional connection left her feeling increasingly isolated and forgotten. It was clear that her marriage was never about companionship, but about fulfilling a role within the grand scheme of European politics, a role that Isabel was expected to perform regardless of her emotional or physical well-being. She had entered the marriage as a young girl with no voice, and over time, the years stripped her of any sense of agency or independence. Despite her unrelenting situation, Isabel's emotional resilience was remarkable, and there were moments when she could still perform her duties as queen with a certain grace. She took on ceremonial duties with the calm demeanor expected of a monarch, often appearing alongside Philip for public displays of unity. Yet there was an underlying sense of sorrow that clung to her every gesture. Over the course of their marriage, Isabel's health began to deteriorate as well. Whether due to the emotional and physical toll of her situation or the persistent stress of life at the court, her condition worsened, yet Philip continued to focus on his own ailments, seemingly oblivious to the young woman beside him who had been sacrificed in the name of royal duty. It was in the year 1568 that Isabel's health took a sharp decline. Stricken with an illness that doctors could not cure, she became bedridden. The young queen, once full of life and promise, now lay in a state of perpetual suffering, her body broken and frail. Her condition was exacerbated by the extreme isolation she had endured in her marriage. The physical distance between her and her husband became a symbol of their emotional distance, and the lack of care she received from the court added to the emotional void she already felt. Philip II, consumed by his own illnesses and grief, was too absorbed in his own suffering to offer any comfort or support to Isabel during her final days. The tragedy of Isabel de Valois was not just in her premature death, but in the fact that she was never able to escape the suffocating life that had been forced upon her. She died on October 3rd, 1568, at the age of 22, barely out of her adolescence, having spent most of her short life trapped in a marriage of necessity rather than affection. Her passing was a moment of reflection for the Spanish court, yet it didn't immediately elicit the widespread grief one might expect for a queen of her stature. Instead, the focus quickly shifted back to the political alliances and the royal heirs that continued to define the monarchy. Isabel's death marked the end of a sad chapter for Spain. Her short, tragic life was a stark reminder of the roles that young women were often forced to play in the dynastic struggles of royal Europe. In Isabel's case, she had been more of a political pawn than a partner to her husband. She had been reduced to a mere vessel for the production of heirs, and a symbol of a fragile alliance between two powerful kingdoms. After Isabel's death, Philip II remarried, this time to Anna of Austria, and their marriage produced children. Yet it was clear that Isabel's place in the Spanish monarchy was one of quiet sorrow. Philip's personal grief for Isabel was never truly acknowledged in the annals of history. The monarch's focus remained on the geopolitical issues of his reign, and Isabel's legacy as a queen who had been sacrificed for political gain was buried beneath the weight of Spain's growing empire. Her story, however, remains a powerful reminder of the immense sacrifices that royal women were often expected to make, and the personal tragedies that shaped the destinies of these powerful families. The legacy of Isabel de Valois is not one of political triumph or power, but of lost youth, broken dreams, and a life spent under the suffocating grip of political necessity. Her story serves as a poignant reminder of the struggles that women in royal families often faced, where their fates were sealed by the demands of dynastic politics rather than any personal aspirations. Isabel's death was not just the loss of a young queen, but a tragic symbol of a time when women were valued less for their hearts and minds than for their ability to fulfill a royal role. The tragedy of Isabel de Valois is not simply the story of a young girl forced into a marriage with a sick king, but of a life lost to the cold demands of history and the enduring suffering of those caught in the gears of power.